This is 50-Minute Fundamentals, where we interview core contributors within crypto and gain insights into their day-to-day operations. In this episode, I'm joined by Jeff, also known as Jiho, who is the co-founder of Sky Mavis, the creators of Axie Infinity. The Axie Infinity universe is a player-owned economy where players have complete ownership of their digital assets and can buy, sell, and trade them just like physical trading cards and collectibles. Axie is currently the #1 NFT game by daily active users and marketplace volume, and has been a true pioneer of the Web3 gaming space. In this episode with Jiho, we discuss how Axie works, what the Ronin chain is, the economic models that Web3 introduces to gaming, ensuring long-term sustainability of the Axie economy, developer activity, and more. Hi Jiho, welcome to 50-Minute Fundamentals. It is really great to have you on. This has been a much requested episode from our community, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Big fan of Token Terminal. I've been using it for years now.
Great to hear. Before we dive into any of the details, it would be great if you can give just a quick intro to Axie Infinity for anyone not yet familiar.
Yeah, sure. So Axies are digital pets. You can battle them, you can collect them, you can use them to earn a variety of tokens or cryptocurrencies. We built Axie starting in 2018 to introduce the world to Web3, to digital property rights through something that's fun, something that's nostalgic, because we felt like crypto was so boring at the time that you need to find some sort of sugar-coated nostalgic package to make Web3 accessible to the world. So yeah, it's our mission.
Yeah, and you've done an incredible job at that. Definite pioneers in the whole Web3 gaming space and brought so much exposure to both crypto gaming, the play and earn model, but just crypto in general. Then another pretty integral part of your whole model is the fact that you started off as an Ethereum native game, but since decided to build your own Ethereum linked sidechain called Ronin. And I'd love if you could speak a bit about the context and reasoning behind that transition.
When we were building Axie, a lot of the infrastructure that we needed to build it didn't exist yet. And Ethereum is amazing as a settlement layer, but the transaction fees were quite high, right? Like it just didn't make sense to do all of these transactions on the main chain, right? So we started looking at different models. There was Loom Network at the time. True Layer 2s were still early, and it was even earlier 4 years ago. So we decided, hey, like nobody's going to build this for us on the timeline that we need it. We're going to build it ourselves. And if we're game developers building infrastructure for ourselves, right, that's also a model that has worked historically, right, where you build infrastructure for one game and then you can expand that to other game developers. We saw that as an interesting path, both for us and for the industry. So yeah, I would say we love Ethereum, and Ronin is an EVM sidechain. And yeah, it was our home, right? That was our hyperbolic chamber where we were training in the early years.
That's great. Then I'd love to move on to speak a bit about the economics of Web3 gaming. And before we go into the nitty gritty of Axie's model, could you maybe say a few words about what features Web3 actually brings to gaming?
I think it's actually quite simple. So just like a layer 1 would pay for security and has a budget to incentivize security, the idea is that a game, in order for it to survive, it needs players. And especially at the beginning, when you're bootstrapping and you're solving the cold start problem, you can help overcome that by using tokens that represent a piece of the network or in-game assets. You can use those to incentivize people to play. Of course, just like a blockchain cannot rely on an issuance budget for security forever, a game also eventually needs to have people that are spending out of love for emotional reasons. And so that is the transition that the entire space is going through right now, is like, oh, nice. Like we took this amazing idea of, protocol economics and this idea that you could have a part of your issuance go to the player base. That was a huge leap forward. Now it's like, okay, what are the other things that are enabled by Web3 that make gaming special, right? That might be using NFTs as a base layer, right? That infinite game experiences could be built on top of one NFT, right? People are thinking about what are all the novel mechanics, but of course the game at its foundation needs to be fun. It needs to be encouraging a lot of the same types of spending that people spend for in traditional games.
Well framed, thank you. And then if we move on to Axie's model more specifically, it would be great if you can give an overview of your two token model with AXS and SLP and what their respective roles are and how they play together.
Games traditionally have typically had digital currencies associated with them, right? It's just that you didn't really own them. And it's not uncommon for games to have different types of resources, right? So within our game, we have a variety of resources. The two main ones that people think of when they think about Axie are Axis, AXS, and SLP, right? So the Axis token is a governance token. It represents a piece of the Axie protocol. It has future governance rights over the community treasury. It's also used in the breeding fee or a piece of the breeding fee. And 4.25% of all marketplace transactions on our in-house NFT marketplace are put into this community treasury, which the Axis token has governance rights over. The SLP is more like an in-game resource, right? It's more like a soft currency. It's uncapped. Its primary use is for breeding. And I would say that, one of the ways to look at it is the goal of SLP is to help create incentives for people to play without necessarily putting too much stress on the governance token, Axis, right? Metaportal put out a really interesting piece, right? Where it's like, oh, there was a flaw. There's kind of like this weird thing with DeFi incentive models where it's like you're paying out the incentive and the governance token. But one of the interesting things was, okay, like a lot of the incentives to play Axie were paid out in the SLP, and that helped drive a lot of growth to the treasury, but without like that dilutive aspect or increased sell pressure to the Axis token.
Now, you mentioned the 4.25% fee that goes from secondary sales to the community treasury. What other revenue streams do you have in place right now?
The primary revenue streams for the treasury are breeding, because a portion of the breeding fee is paid out in Axis. There's the 4.25% marketplace fee. And then there are also things called runes and charms, which are basically power-ups, things that you can attach to your Axies. And when you mint those or turn those into an ERC 1155, or basically when you tokenize them, then there is a stable fee, $3 worth of Axis that's paid to the treasury. And those are the current sources, right? And it's possible that over time, just the runes and charms, that's a new source, right? And that's interesting because it's like more of a recurring thing where runes and charms actually expire each season. So it's something that is basically a recurring source of revenue to the treasury.
That's great. As they're a new thing, I want to grab onto that. How has it taken off since you introduced runes and charms from a revenue perspective? Has it lived up to the expectations you had?
Yeah, so a big goal with runes and charms was to help balance and stabilize the economy, especially around SLP, because of course, as we grew, the number of Axies, the number of players shot up, and that also increased the amount of SLP that was being earned in game. But eventually, as growth started to slow, because we didn't have this recurring revenue model and an economic model, the mint to burn ratio started to get out of whack. But the runes and charms system has actually made SLP deflationary, which has basically helped to balance the economy, right? Because of course, like I think in an ideal universe, right, like you would have balance with both soft currency and the hard currency within your gaming ecosystem. So runes and charms have been really important for that. Of course, it's also a bear market, so metrics are hard to measure right now compared to maybe when we're in an adoption cycle. But the initial results are really promising, and I mean SLP has become deflationary. The treasury has a new source of incoming access, so it's been really interesting to watch this fold out.
That's great to hear, and it sounds like runes and charms have solved a lot of the problems that you were facing at some point. What other actions are you currently taking to ensure the long-term sustainability of the Axie economy?
The way that I see it is people need to be spending out of love for emotional reasons, out of anger too, out of wrath, sometimes out of envy, right? These are the types of emotions that drive sustainable game economies. And it's important for our features and our roadmap priorities to also be almost mappable to different emotions, right? So we have part upgrades, right? Which is this idea of like envy and being able to, maybe increase your power over time and also increase your emotional attachment to your Axies, right? Like if you start to upgrade it, change its appearance, you're exerting your will on this digital avatar, this digital pet. And so I think it's really important, right? Like to allow for accessories, right? That we have an accessories launch actually coming this December. It's kind of like well fit for the holiday. Body part upgrades, unique art for the cards that are associated with the different body parts. Lore. We just released our first lore trailer cinematic to the community last night, and there was so much excitement around that because it's not necessarily only focusing on the economic aspect of the ecosystem. So there has to be a lot of emotion, and that emotion needs to be thought of purposely when mapping out the roadmap.
That's a really great perspective. And when you speak about community and love for the game and everything outside of the economic perspective, one critique towards a lot of play and earn models has been the high barrier to entry, and it's only for crypto native users. You need to purchase assets. You've reacted pretty well to that, and some while back also introduced a pretty big update with Origin to your model. So do you want to speak a bit about how you are lowering the barriers to entry to the whole Axie ecosystem?
So one of the things that we see from the research and the data is that people don't understand the NFTs until they actually own one. So that's a really weird barrier to overcome. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to get people hooked to the art, to the universe, to the community, to the gameplay before they have to make any economic decision, right? So Origins is free to play, so people can show their friends and family members. We can do traditional marketing as well, traditional user acquisition to get people to fall in love with the universe first. And then once they fall in love, then they can start going through the difficult parts, which is like the wallet onboarding, actually buying Axie. So that was one of the things that we realized is in the funnel or the onboarding process, the steps were out of whack, right? Like you should be in love with the IP or you should be really curious before you have to make any economic decisions. Right? It's more of like, migrating more to this freemium model, right? So Origins has been really key in restructuring that process, which opens up more distribution channels. I think another thing that, Axie has done really well from the early days though is, whenever Axies are cheap, and this is a good thing about bear markets is that it helps with this. So whenever Axies are cheap, the community, they just give Axies away to people. Because, right, of course, as owners of the network and because it's a player-owned economy, they do have some incentive, right, to get more people involved. But also Axie is just something that's fun, it's lovable, it's nostalgic. It's easy to communicate to people what it is because it reminds them of things from their childhood, right? It reminds people of Pokemon, it reminds people of Tamagotchi.
Now, that's actually really fascinating to hear that when prices go down, people start sharing them. It's also, I think, a sign of a very thriving community.
I got into crypto in 2017, so I'm maybe not too OG, but I hear about like the early days of ETH and Bitcoin, and a lot of the people that about, like, I don't know, maybe Brian Armstrong, apparently he used to go to bars and just give out hundreds of Bitcoin per day. So gifting is really important in the adoption of cryptocurrencies. And I think one of the amazing things is that we have this culture of gifting in the community. In the early days, right, like nobody wanted Axies. So we had to give them out, right? And we would find different mechanisms to give them out. And yeah, I think that's really, really, really important to adoption.
Now that we are pretty deep in the bear market and in the big picture, a lot of the hype, a lot of users have disappeared. Do you have some insights to share about your user activity development? How has it kind of withheld through this very volatile and difficult market cycle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, numbers are down, right? You can see it on Token Terminal, you can see it across the board. But there's a time to plant seeds and there's a time to harvest. And sometimes the farmer gets discouraged while planting the seeds. Of course, we should never use the bear market as an excuse. And there are always things that we should improve on. So right now, we're really just focused on shipping. When you look at Axie's potential, it's clear that there's still so much left to be done. And I think something that we've failed at really delivering on is delivering on that emotional connection between collectors and their Axies. And that's something that we're putting a lot of effort into moving forward. And I expect big progress on that in 2023. But I will also say that there are, 150,000 plus monthly active addresses interacting with Axie smart contracts, right? That still makes us the largest Web3 game by far. Each day, there are 5,000 plus Axie NFTs that are sold through the marketplace. So it's a very similar environment to 2019, except that the community, I would say, is still about 1,000 times larger. I think last time in 2019, we were going through times like this, I would say, as an industry, as a space. And I think there were about 150 to 200 people in the community. And now there are 1,000 people that download Axie Infinity Origins every day. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, the market situation has been the same for everyone. So everything is down. No surprise in that. Now, you said you're focusing on shipping right now. And I could say that the data backs that. We recently shipped a new metric on Token Terminal, which is active developers. And if we pull that up on your dashboard, we can see that your developer activity is higher than it's ever been. So it would be really exciting to hear what you are working on right now. What are those new features that you're shipping?
It's a lot. So right now, a lot of focus is on Axie Infinity Origins and getting it ready for app stores and a mainstream audience. So, I think the game is solid, is a solid foundation, but there's still a lot of improvements around onboarding, first-time user experience, the competitive aspect, as well as some of the pacing elements of the game and game balance. And then, of course, we're also working on land, right? So the kingdom builder, where you build up a city or a town on top of land, you harvest resources, fight for control of territory, decorate. So it's that type of game. And then we also have builders program projects, which are, made by the community. There's a lot of this activity might not necessarily even show up on the GitHub, right? I think like what on the GitHub, it might be a lot of like more like smart contract stuff. So it's like, oh, like we're working on accessories right now, right? So that could be leading that to heat up, right? So accessories would be cosmetic enhancements for your Axies, right? One of the things that we've always dreamed of since 2018 was being able to put jewelry or shoes or hats, right? Basically these decorative elements to change the appearance of our Axies. So we have accessories on the way, and there's more, right? Like part upgrades. So there's just so much on the roadmap, and yeah, we're hiring, right? I think a lot of teams, they like get so excited during the bull market and they hire and they blow out their budgets, and then in the bear market they get like so depressed and they start like cutting like mad. We're like the turtle, right? We're the tortoise. Like, I think we're the only NFT project from 2018 that kind of just continuously has just kept building alongside the community. We're just steady and consistent and relentless and aggressive.
That takes you pretty far in tough times. You get far by just surviving. And then if you have the ability to build a team and build new features, then that builds a really strong basis.
It's tough messaging because I believe in always talking about a definite and optimistic future. And sometimes in crypto on a day-to-day basis, it might be like, oh, the best you can do is a optimistic and indefinite picture of the future, right? Things are going to get better. Like Web3 is going to transform society. But the day-to-day, it's like everything is so up in the air. It's really hard to sometimes paint this picture of a definite and optimistic vision of the future. But that's actually what's needed to form a great movement that can actually bring that type of future into existence.
And I'm going to hit you with one last question. We'll take it to a bit of a high level and visionary look on what is the long-term vision and your roadmap for the whole Axie Infinity ecosystem.
So we're here to bring digital property rights to all users of the internet, starting with gamers, right? Like we think that Web3 is going to change the world, but we know that it has to be accessible, it has to be fun, it can't be boring in order for it to act as that Trojan horse. So I see what we're doing at the intersection of entertainment, education, and almost like social networks or community building. And I think when you combine all of those, and games are the best suited to combine those things, then you have something that's really powerful. Then you have something that has a viral distribution built into it. And that's how we can get everyone involved with this transformative technology. And once that happens, right, that's going to cause massive and beneficial changes to power distribution in society and on the internet. So that's what we're trying to do. I think like Axie is a huge part of it by being this flagship IP that acts as this face or outward presence that can attract more people into the ecosystem. Ronin has a huge role in it, in that the infrastructure needs to work, it needs to be scalable, and it needs to be battle tested, and it needs to be secure. So I see those things working hand in hand to basically act as this spear tip for the adoption of Web3 and digital property rights.
That's a great vision. And thank you so much for this quick dive into the history and current situation.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.